Hi, I'm Mike Scrase, writer of Zip. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, Twitter, Threads, basically everywhere. Oh yeah, TikTok too. And you are watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a very talented individual from across the pond. He is, of course, the writer of Zip, which is now into 3 issues, and we'll dive into the comic itself. Mike Scrase, the creator of Zip, how are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing very well. I've got some exciting stuff on the horizon. I'd love to tell you about it.
Oh, we're definitely diving into that here today for sure. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
I'm a visually impaired writer. I'm blind. Many people think that it's blindness means you can't see anything at all. I'm one of the blind people who have low vision as opposed to no vision. And that experience has kind of colored my entire life, which is how I ended up writing Zip. So yeah, we have 3 issues of the comics so far. This year we were actually picked up by Marcosia, so we're now published by Marcosia. They distribute our single issues on Comixology, Amazon Comixology and Drive-Thru Comics. They don't distribute single issues in print. We will be collecting issues into a trade paperback once there's like an arc completed. For the time being, it's digital only, unless you back one of our Kickstarters and get one of our Kickstarter exclusive print copies.
The one thing I loved about this particular comic was when I got to read the first 2 issues, and I appreciate that, by the way. Thank you for that.
Oh, that's right. You always do that.
And reading the issue 3's script itself, because I found that fascinating in its own right, which makes me want to see the comic issue 3 once you get the art.
Yeah, this one, I definitely think this one is our best yet.
Yeah, it's really amazing. But the one thing I found about the first couple of issues was it was a very intense comic. It had a distinctive style and definitely an amazing tone for the first couple of issues that I got to read here. What influenced your choices in putting this all together? And how does it reflect on your personality?
I do like your description of the comic as being intense. And as I said before, I'm kind of an intense guy.
Yeah.
I feel like I've always had kind of dark sensibilities. I can kind of imagine some of the scenes that you might be describing as intense. For example, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there is a scene in the first issue where everything's been going so wrong for Zip that, and I don't know if we need to give like a trigger warning or a content warning, something here. At the end of the first issue, there is a suicide attempt by Zip in which she goes and lies down on a set of train tracks. I've had struggles with my own mental health. I worked in a really soul-crushing job for a long time, and every day on my way to work, past a set of train tracks, and every day on my way to work, I kind of went, you know what might be better than going to work today? So I'm still here. We've got an issue 2, so Zip's still around too. Things get to a dark place, but I kind of have a similar mantra to Don Bluth, the animator behind Land Before Time, American Tail, those kinds of things. He had a mantra that things could get very dark as long as things turn out all right in the end. Then it's okay. He wrote for children. So I have the freedom to get a bit darker, and there might not necessarily always be a totally happy ending. Things might have like a bit of a mixed bag. I'm trying to write a story that gives people some hope in the end. I don't just want to say, well, it's all pointless, just give up. But life can be challenging sometimes, and disability and ableism can really wear on you. And so to be true to the experience, it might get dark and it might get intense sometimes, but there's a reason for that.
The one thing I found interesting as well is the fact that you're giving your superheroes limitations, or at least that's how you're putting these characters together, is a great take on the superhero genre. When we think of superheroes, we think usually everything is good to go. There's no issues with them in the world. They're always the ones that win, etc., etc. But why did you feel the need to give your characters these limitations?
Actually, that's something that is, believe it or not, something that's true about me, because my blindness is caused by a very rare condition called aniridia.
Oh.
And that's actually a genetic mutation. What aniridia does, sometimes it means you have less of an iris, and sometimes it means you have no iris at all. And I am the case that I have no iris. So
Wow.
if you look, I've just got giant pupils, just no color in my eye. So what the iris does is, if you remember your science in school, when it's bright, it contracts, and when it's dark, it dilates and your pupil gets bigger. But I have no irises at all, so I'm actually better at seeing in the dark than the average person could ever be, because I don't have anything there to restrict any light. But not having an iris changes the shape of your eyeball, and that messes with the lenses inside. They're not aligned right or something. I'm not going to try and explain it like a doctor would, but that's basically how it works. I'm extremely short-sighted, but I've got better night vision than the average person would. So whenever I would, read a comic like a superhero comic, and oh yeah, they had some sort of mutation that gave them powers, and I'd be reading it and I think that, oh, that's well, maybe a little bit about how it works, but there might be some added caveats there. And then what spurred me to have the idea to actually write it into a comic was when I read an article by cracked.com, which some of your listeners or watchers might be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And that article was 7 awesome superpowers ruined by science. It's one of those articles that's kind of like a nitpicky for fun type situation, where it's like a non-fiction comedy article, using movies to jump on and talk about like science and like specialist subjects like that. And I was reading it and I thought, there's a story here, because they had an entry on super speed and they had an entry on immortality. And if you read the comic, there's 2 characters who have those exact powers. And you might see a few other ideas come from that article in the future as well.
Your characters, you've set them apart from other stuff that I've read, and I've been doing this show for 16 years. I can safely say I've never seen iterations of these characters you've created anywhere else.
Thank you.
You have a unique perspective, unique batch of characters, and the fact that you're into 3 issues is incredible in itself. It's definitely something that people should be reading.
Thank you. I mean, if people want to read it, we have a Kickstarter campaign and pre-launch at the moment, or pre-launch at the current time of this recording. We are launching on November the 6th. 6th. I said 6th and not 6th. But that's probably not important. The important thing is, if you go to Kickstarter and search for Zip under comics, you'll find our campaign. This one is titled Zip 1 to 3, an imperfect superhuman versus body horror cyborgs.
When it comes to the team itself, who is the team around, of course, Zip?
Yeah, I am one of the creators. I came up with the initial idea, but an idea is not everything. An idea is worth very little without execution.
True.
Sam, also a creator of Zip, Sam Spina, is an Argentinian artist who came on board, and his art is so fantastic that it's been praised by Marvel and DC writer Gail Simone.
Oh, wow.
I've got it on a link to it on my website. I can show you it in print. On Twitter, I showed her a few images of the comic, and she said, I love this art. So now that I'm printing that on everything. So Sam is great. Every issue we do, he says, oh, this was even more fun to draw than the last one. And so I strive to make every script I write more fun for him to do than the last one. Our letterer is Ferran Delgado. He's a veteran of like lettering across a bunch of companies, including Marvel and DC. And we've also had some cover artists in the form of Vanessa Cardinale, and interestingly enough, Simpsons storyboard director Matt Schofield, who has a Kickstarter campaign in pre-launch himself,
Oh, wow.
Steamroller Man 2.
Wow, that's amazing. That's incredible.
I know, so I feel incredibly lucky with the team that I've managed to come across.
Working together with such an amazing team itself, collaborations are I think, critical when it comes to putting comics together, especially when it comes to Zip. Is there a memorable moment when you realize you were onto something special?
The whole plot of issue 2 was, in a way, Sam's idea. So Mr. Untouchable, in issue 2, there's an antagonist called Mr. Untouchable, who is a martial artist who is so skilled at what he does that if he sees an attack coming, he can dodge it. He actually comes from the days when I used to do Zip as a webcomic all by myself. This is kind of almost a reboot. Sam, during the first issue, he said to me, something I'd really love to draw. What if Zip had an issue with her powers where if she touched someone, they exploded. San's first language isn't English. He does speak English very well, but I didn't really understand what he was getting at first. It was a bit weird. Like she touches someone and they explode. Why? And so I had to think about it, and I was like, well, why would this happen? I want to be able to accommodate San. I'm sure that he has a reason for wanting to do this. So I was like, there must be. He's a great artist. So if he wants to do this, I shouldn't just dismiss it. And so I was thinking about it, and I was like, okay, well, if she's moving fast all the time, maybe maybe if she gets nervous, she would sort of shake, but she'd shake so fast that like her body would almost become like a super collider, and her touching somebody else would release like a huge amount of energy that would make them explode. Basically, the more I thought about it, the more ideas I got, and I came up with like this whole other subplot in Zip 2 that completely tied in to Mr. Untouchable's story, because Mr. Untouchable is a man who cannot be touched. And in that issue, it's totally about how Zip cannot touch anyone. So it's almost like the two stories just came together like that. And it made the whole issue just tie together in a big bow with this unifying theme. And we basically were able to see like the childhoods of both Zip and Mr. Untouchable and explain why they are who they are.
Nice.
And it made the culminating climax at the end of the comic, which had always been something I'd planned, but this made it have so much more weight and meaning. Yeah. And it was all thanks to that one thing that Sam wanted to draw that just made me completely snowball all of these ideas.
Was there a piece of artwork you got back from Sam that was just way better than what was written in the script?
I mean, pretty much all of it. I mean, there have been times when Sam has basically read my mind. This moment in the comic here, Sam completely read my mind with this. I pictured this scene looking exactly this way in the script. Actually, that scene was inspired by an old Amiga game, which your American listeners / watchers probably never heard of. There's a cutscene in that game that looks a lot like that. But Sam read my mind with that scene, and that was amazing. But there's other times when Sam draws something completely different to the way that I've envisioned it. It's been so much better. It's added so much. So in this new issue, for example, like I mentioned, it's all about cyborgs. It's about this collective of nanobots who have been designed to combine generative AI and 3D printing, but they seek the most complex objects they can find for training data. And the only way they can analyze those objects is to atomize them. Unfortunately, they've escaped and identified the most complex object of all, human beings. So there's this one scene that Sam drew where he made the gutters like twist into squares. And previously he'd established that when the Hive breaks something down, they kind of organize it into squares as they're reassembling it. So it's almost as if in that scene, the Hive is actually taking over the comic itself. And that really set a cool scene. It's not something that's immediately obvious, but it's really cool. And just, I mean, there's a lot of action in this new issue. It's our longest, most action-packed issue to date. And Sam's paneling with those action scenes has just made it even more high octane than it was when I wrote it. Yeah.
Something to look forward to.
Definitely.
What themes or messages are you most passionate about conveying to your readers who are just seeing Zip for the first time or who have followed Zip for the past 2 or 3 issues?
I think that a big theme of the stories that we're telling at the moment, being comfortable within your own skin. I keep coming back to Zip being quite an insecure person. She finds confidence in being like a superhero. When Sam was asking me about, how he should draw her, I said, when she's out of costume, her clothes should be quite baggy and concealing. I mean, long sleeves, which she uses to hide her costume because she wears it underneath. And if you asked her, that's what she'd tell you it was for. But it also does, kind of conceal her, and her clothes are baggy too. And she looks kind of, less confident in herself. Whereas when she's in her costume, that's where she feels that she's taking, a bit of control over herself. I mean, she has to live her life too. And yeah, it's really about being comfortable in your own skin and valuing yourself outside of just simply what you can do for people or what material value you can offer.
The fact that you're building a world with a bunch of amazing, talented people here is impressive to see in itself. Are there any specific, like, entertainment or media inspirations, three inspirations that set your world apart from, say, other comics that are of a similar genre?
I don't know. I mean, some of the other inspirations that I've had are probably a bit more talked about. I'm a big Spider-Man fan, and I was quite inspired by the format of the Spectacular Spider-Man show. In that show, it had episodes that you could watch like standalone, but it also had kind of like a ongoing theme, and I really liked that. I also liked that it had kind of like its own bad guy, episode to episode, but it also has kind of like a larger bad guy kind of looming in the background, that was built up for a while. So that's you can kind of see that in Zip. But in terms of like media that's outside. See, I'm like, oh, I can't think of anything, but I just said the Chaos Engine earlier, didn't I? Nobody's heard of the Chaos Engine. If, so yeah, the Chaos Engine. I think I'm influenced by quite a lot of like weird old Amiga games. The Amiga was like a home computer in like Europe. Think like Commodore 64, but different. So there were just like a bunch of old kooky obscure games on that. A lot of them had like this really amazing sense of like visual style and well audio style as well.
Yeah.
So I mean my father worked for Aardman Animations, the company that created Wallace and Gromit, Chicken Run. I mean he worked on basically almost every Aardman feature from Chicken Run to Pirates before he quit.
Oh, wow.
And he was the person who taught me that it's possible to do creative things for a living. My father, when I ran my first Kickstarter campaign, I had announced that we were doing it and we had it in pre-launch. And my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
Oh.
So I was speaking to him and I said, we may have to delay this now because of that, just because I'm not sure if I can handle it. But he was so excited about the campaign that he encouraged me not to cancel. So we went ahead. He died during the campaign, and I kept going because I knew that he would have wanted me to. It's really, I wish that I hadn't spent so many years procrastinating. I procrastinated for many years, and I came to realize that that was because I was afraid of rejection. But what I've learned is that even though rejection hurts, it doesn't hurt anywhere near as much as knowing that you're too late to make someone you care about proud of you.
That's unfortunate. I'm sorry for your loss there.
Well, I mean, I just want, if I'm going to, I'll use that to tell everyone, don't be afraid of rejection because there are worse things.
I agree. Yeah, don't stop your creativity. Keep going as long as you can. That's definitely a good focus as well too, because the world can always use more creativity rather than negativity. So, everyone usually asks, what's the wisest piece of advice or what's the most BS piece of advice you've ever received? But what is the second wisest piece of advice you've received that has stuck with you in your career?
One of the wisest pieces of advice I've ever had was from Sid Field. I mean, he didn't tell me directly. I wish I had. He's got this great book, The Definitive Guide to Screenwriting, and there is a section on scene writing in there. Arrive late, leave early. So basically what that means is anytime you write a scene, cut to that scene, whether it's you're actually cutting in terms of camera or you're just getting to the scene, arrive at that scene at the latest possible point you can, and then leave at the earliest point you can to where it still makes sense. You don't need to show characters walking from a car and then getting into a building and then walking up some stairs. If they pull up to the road, you can potentially just go, oh, they put up next to the building. So obviously they're going to go into the building and then arrive somewhere. You may not even need to show them pulling up. It depends on the context. You just basically have to look at how much can you strip this down to where this scene still makes context.
Yeah.
Keep your scenes snappy, keep your dialogue snappy, and you will see a huge increase in the quality of your writing just from that alone.
It's amazing how many times you actually see films and you wonder, where was the editor in this? Where was the fact that they could have cut down a lot of this dialogue or things like that too?
Yeah, I mean, people always complain about the fact that nobody says goodbye on the phone in a film or nobody locks their car. Guys, you don't want that. It's going to be boring. Like, you really don't actually want that. Trust me. Take it from me and Sid Field. If you if you can't trust me, you can definitely trust Sid Field. You may not have heard of who he is, but you know you should have.
Yeah. I have like 5 of his books on screenwriting just sitting
Yeah,
behind me here currently. It's just, he's the epitome of what a good screenwriter and scriptwriter
yeah. I
should be.
mean, that guy's book, that's my
Oh,
Bible.
oh yeah.
You know.
The fact that you have a Kickstarter campaign currently ongoing is wonderful to see. And I want to see a trade paperback for however long you do this series here. What unique rewards or perks are we going to receive when backing this amazing comic series?
Well, you can see a poster behind me. Hang on, I always forget which arm.
Yeah, you got it.
And the video's got a delay on it too. So every time I point, our publisher, like I said, does not distribute comics, single issue comics in print format. So you can only get these print comics from our Kickstarter. Also, they only list one cover on the Comixology and Drive-Through Comics versions of the comics. So you can get this cover in digital format on Comixology or Drive-Through, but you can't get this one by Sana Spina. This cover is a Kickstarter exclusive, whether your copy is digital or print. The same is true for our second issue cover. This is the main cover that Marcosio lists. That one's by storyboard director Matt Schofield, as I mentioned before. This one is Sans cover. I love this one. I mean, I love all of them, but this is Vanessa Cardinale's cover. So those are some exclusive covers that you can get in digital or print from our campaign. And we've also got these stickers, the 7 sticker set.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also introducing smartphone wallpapers to this campaign, you know, digital, so I can't really hold them up, but we will have them. And I've been going through, you know, art that I can use for the smartphone wallpapers. And there's, I mean, Sam's so great, and we've got so many great artists that I've actually gone and been like, oh, I think I can get like 10 of these. I mean, I don't know if, you know, you generally want to, you know, curate a little bit, but I mean, it's digital, so they're not going to be taking up anybody's like room in anybody's house. So I think like, you know, 10 smartphone wallpapers to choose from is probably fine.
You always need a good lock screen background or, you know, main screen background for whatever you have. And I think you have some beautiful artwork there for sure. And those that get to read like issue 1, 2, and 3, I'm sure are going to find their favorite image or favorite background for their own phones too.
And yeah, and we've also, I mean, I should mention as well, if people need to catch up on the series, we're going to have bundle tiers, so catch up on your back issues. I've got a reward tier specifically for if you just want to try the series out. You can just get Zip 1 by itself, and if you really, really like me, you can get a signed copy too.
Talk about the fan interactions with Zip itself, comments and testimonials, things that you've received from fans that have read the book. What are some that have kind of stuck in your mind?
Oh, man. I mean, this is another situation where you can tell that I liked it because I pray on everything, just like the Girl Simone quote. There was a review on Amazon by a guy, I'm trying to remember I think it was Apparition Writer. Basically, he's given us some fairly long reviews, and a quote that I love to pull from his review of our first issue is that Zip is now one of his favorite new comics. And you know, I always like to say, you know, do you know how many new comics there are? There are a lot. So if we're his favorite or one of his favorites, then we're doing pretty well. And that same guy reviewed Zip number 2 as well. In his review, he was talking about how, I find it really interesting how, you know, in this issue, Zip doesn't really have control of any of her powers. That's her whole conflict, is that she doesn't have control. Whereas Mr. Untouchable, her antagonist, as a foil to her, he has perfect control over his body because he's this expert martial artist. And I went, yeah, I meant to do that.
Oh, that's awesome. I love the fact that I hear the passion in your voice. I see it in our interview here, those that are watching it. I love the fact that you're excited about your comic. And I think it's wonderful to see. And that's infectious to people. And this is why I love doing the show. Like, I love seeing excitement from the creators and what they're putting together.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lesson in that too, because I've spoken to people who have projects that they want funding for. And I mention Kickstarter, or they ask me for advice about Kickstarter, and I give them advice about what you might need to do. They sort of understand how much they're going to need to be online, and how much work they're going to need to go. They're going to go. They go, oh, I'm dreading this, but what I try to tell them is, okay, you're going to be doing a lot of work, and it is going to be really tiring, and it's going to take up a lot of your time. But at the end of the day, all that time you spend on social media and online and everything, all of that time is going to be spent talking about something that you've created and that you presumably like because you've made it. So it's not really the nightmare that you think it is, because all you're doing is talking about something that you love. And you can get negativity online. That happens. But I mean, if you're just doing it for a hobby and you're not bothered about showing anyone, then that's perfectly valid. But if you're planning on putting your work out there and making a living on it, or just showing people, then you're going to be putting yourself out there and being, subject to criticism anyway. So the fact that people can get mean online is just something you kind of have to deal with. But then you have to think as well, if you do a good job, people will be really positive as well. You just got to understand which comments to take heed of and which comments to not take heed of. It's really important a skill to have. And I am very thankful in that I haven't really had any mean comments at all. I feel like that means I haven't quite made it yet. but I haven't. I've said a lot. My comic has quite a lot of sort of socially left ideas. And I think the moment that some weirdos on the internet get hold of it and go, oh, this is woke, it's terrible, don't buy it, that'll be the moment things really kick off, because those people do give me some really great press.
What's the adage? There's no bad press, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But is there anything that I haven't asked you you'd like me to ask you now?
Well, I think I probably should just elaborate a bit more on the third issue, because this one, I mean, a real hot button issue at the moment is generative AI and the way it's impacting entertainment, the arts, and humanity in general. And that's what our new issue is looking at. Basically, the tagline on Kickstarter is that in this issue, Zip fist fights AI, because a mega corporation has created a product called the Hive. It's a collective of nanobots, and like I was saying before, they analyze products by breaking them down atomically, and then using that to scan the item for training data. They're designed to disintegrate things and then rebuild them into, quote unquote, new consumer products for the market. But as I said before, they have identified the most complex objects that they can possibly find, human beings, and have marked that as the ideal target for atomization. So that's what Zip's up against this issue.
I'm going to touch on AI real quick here.
Okay.
See, the con for me with AI is that it scrapes the internet for text and images and steals work from honest to goodness human beings that have put their blood, sweat, and tears into their creative craft is horrible. Is there even a positive to AI?
Well, when you say AI, I mean, you're talking about, AI is a broad term, but you mean generative AI.
Yes.
I suppose I can conceive of an ethical way to do it, but I mean, the way it's being done at the moment is not ethical at all. I don't think it's very conducive to creating art, possibly as a way to, for example, create accessible versions of a form of media that don't exist because the company that's made them doesn't feel like there's a profit in doing it. Potentially there is some good in that, but it would have to be done without taking people's art and their hard work without their consent. People would need to be adequately compensated. There would need to be regulations for preventing, misinformation. I don't want to commit to it really because, I'm sure there's some facet I haven't thought about that would undermine the whole situation. I would say that I could probably conceive of an ethical way it could be done, but the trouble is this little thing called capitalism.
Everyone has one person that inspired them on their path to where they are today. Who was that for you?
Well, I think I mentioned my dad earlier. He worked in animation for probably 20 years, possibly more. Before he was working with Aardman and doing, Chicken Run and Wallace and Gromit and all that stuff, he worked for a company called CMTB Animation here in Bristol. They made a show called The Trapdoor. I have no idea if Americans have heard of Trapdoor, but British people definitely have. He worked with a few, smaller animation studios first. So he told me that it was possible to, even be creative for a living in the first place.
From a professional standpoint, you have created 3 issues of Zip, and I'm sure you're going to create many more in the future among other
Yes.
projects. I'm looking forward to seeing what you create in the future. From a professional standpoint, you are successful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you consider yourself personally successful?
Oh man. Oh, just laughing at a question work as an answer. I think that if you read the comic, you probably see that Zip can be quite a chaotic person. There may be some, there's quite a lot in this and in this comic that I've used my own real life experiences to reflect. Yeah, I am a very chaotic person, really, but I guess it depends on what you define as having like success in your personal life. I've always said that I'm not very confident as a person. And people always say to me, "You seem extremely confident." We haven't brought this up before, but in addition to like writing and things, I've done like stand-up comedy and things. So they'll say, "Well, how can you say that you're not confident? You've performed shows in front of like 100 people." But that's different. I feel like speaking in front of 100 people is easier than speaking in front of one, because in front of 100 people, you can't pick out an individual person. You're not focusing on one face. Whereas in a social interaction, and also social interactions are muddy. People humor you, they spare your feelings. On a stage, you either get a laugh or you don't. It's simple. And I'm visually impaired as well. So when I'm on stage, I can't really see anyone's face. They could be going, and I'd never see it. Well, in a sense, I'm not personally successful because I forgot what the question was and started talking about something completely different. When you talk about whether I'm personally successful, I think I kind of have quite a lot of trouble switching off, really. The lines between where my personal success and my professional success ends, they kind of blur together. Yeah, it's kind of hard for me to really separate them.
When I ask these questions, it just comes back to the mental state of where you are currently at this particular moment.
I'm doing a lot better than I was. I have to say that.
Well, that's a good thing. And I appreciate the journey that you've been on in the fact that you're putting this together and the fact that you're continuing to do something you're passionate about. You're getting it out to people to see. And I think that's the ultimate personal goal when it comes to your creativity itself. Because if we just sit behind a computer and don't interact with people, although that sometimes is a benefit, I think it just comes back to what we enjoy doing and do we want to share it with people? The reverse of success is failure. How do you deal with your failures?
This comes really back to what I was saying earlier about rejection. And, it's a kind of a cliche, but failures are things that you can learn from. Like, for example, in our last campaign, when it came time, oh yeah, the other reward I forgot to mention is that everybody who pledges at least, £1/$1 whatever the currency is, gets a credit in the back of the comic on our social medias and our website. And the reason that's important is because it does mean that we can't finish lettering until the campaign's over. Last time, when I contacted our letterer to finish off, we hadn't done like the cover, we hadn't done the indica. We'd finished the comic, but not the extra pages really. So what ended up happening was Farron was busy with another project. So getting the comic finished was delayed, and that caused some issues. I have made absolutely sure this time to get as much as physically possible ready ahead of time, so that if there is some sort of scheduling conflict with Farron, once he's available, it will be as quick as possible for him to do that. And I've just made sure to give ourselves a little bit of extra room there. So that's an example of where I have learned from failure.
The younger generation is looking at your work and they're becoming inspired to be creative in their own way, whether it's as a comic writer or something else in the creative field. How can they inspire the generation that follows them?
The question of how they would inspire the younger generation would inspire the generation that comes after them would depend on what they want to inspire that generation to do, or what they want them to be inspired to feel. I feel that it's important to be authentic and draw upon the important experiences in your life. I think that it's important to have empathy for other people's experiences and try and imagine what their situation is, and understand that the human race is kind of all in this together in a way. We're social animals and we've come as far as we have because we collaborate with each other. So having like a individualistic, cynical outlook on life where you don't want to help anyone and everything is somebody else's problem, it's important to be a social good in the world. And that's what I try to do with my work. I do want to advocate for marginalized groups, disability, because that's where my experience lies. But I do like to try and make my work appeal to anyone who feels marginalized and who might need to be lifted up.
If your life was a comic book, what would its title be, and what would its soundtrack be?
Oh man, well, I always feel like the soundtrack sometimes would potentially just be a series of wah, wah.
Nice.
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking recently though, I've been listening to a lot of like motivational like montage music, well, as I've been working really long hours on this Kickstarter. I think I've got too eclectic of a take. I'm kind of if I was to pick a theme song for myself, which is something that I do for a lot of the characters, I am kind of like an edgy 90s boy, and I do like my grunge and I like my Nirvana. So probably something like that, maybe like punk, because I'm kind of an anti-authoritarian type person. I think a comic about me would just be me being very displeased at the establishment a lot. You know, I'm not anti-establishment. The establishment, for as long as I remember, was anti-me, and I just didn't take it sitting down.
There you go. Love it. Well, Mike, I do hate to say it, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, where can we find you? How can we support you? And of course, anything else you would like to promote? Of course, where can we find the Kickstarter as well?
Okay, well, on social media, we are Zip Comic UK on everything. So that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, and TikTok. The Kickstarter will simply be Zip under Comics. We are launching on November the 6th. Come and join us to get some exclusive rewards while you still can.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talk. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO. Of course, the website's going through a revamp because I'm only one person. Give me a break. You can find, of course, all of our interviews on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast is back at twogeekstalking.podbean.com or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.